Father loved silence. He believed noise was the mark of lesser people. So he installed a decibel meter in our home. Speaking above 40 decibels meant that we would have to pay him $10. Laughing above 60 decibels meant $50. And crying or throwing a tantrum was a serious offense. At $100 per second. The year I turned 4, I fell and broke my arm. I did not make a single sound. I bit down so hard that I cracked 2 teeth. But I saved thousands in noise fees. He praised me for it and called me a high-value child, one that was worth the investment. I treasured that compliment and observed the rules carefully, keeping the house wrapped in suffocating silence. Then came the stormy night. A thief broke in. He had a knife and was creeping toward my mother as she slept. I watched it all from the gap in the wardrobe where I was hiding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shriek and wake my father to do something, anything. However, my eyes drifted to the decibel meter on the wall, and my hand found nothing but an empty pocket. I did not have enough allowance. One scream would cost hundreds, and I simply could not afford it. The walls of our home were white, while the numbers on the decibel meter were red. It was the most obvious thing in the house. I sat at the dining table staring at the number on the display, 28. It was safe for now. Dad sat at the head of the table, holding a newspaper and turning the pages, barely making any sound. Mom was in the kitchen, and the sound of her chopping vegetables was so careful and measured. It was almost inaudible. I did not dare breathe too deeply. Even breathing too loudly came with a fee. Dad had explained it once. Air itself was free, but the air inside our home had been bought and paid for. When he purchased the house, if you used a resource, you paid for it. In front of me sat a bowl of plain chicken broth, with noodles and no meat. Meat cost extra, and my account balance was insufficient. The week before I accidentally knocked a glass off the table. The glass itself was $5, the cleaning fee was $10, the disruption fee was $20, and the decibel meter had spiked to 80, which added another $200 in fines. My allowance had been docked into the negative, so this week it was plain broth. Gary, she's still growing, Mom said as she carried a dish out from the kitchen, her voice suppressed to barely a whisper. The decibel meter flickered to 35, still within the safe zone. Dad set down his newspaper and adjusted his glasses. Sandra, rules are rules. She broke a glass, she made noise, and thus she must bear the consequences. That's what accountability is. Mom bit her lip and said nothing. She set a plate of roasted chicken at the center of the table. The smell drifted over and I gulped. Then my stomach let out a sound entirely on its own, a low, involuntary growl. I looked up at the wall in horror. 41. Dad's fork paused in midair. He reached for his phone and opened the black accounting app. Stomach noise 1 decibel, over the limit. A fine of $10 has been added to your tab. You now owe me $245. I lowered my head as tears gathered at the corners of my eyes. Could not cry. Crying would cost me $100 per second, and I could not afford it. I clenched my jaw and forced the tears back. Eat, Dad said, lifting a piece of chicken onto his own plate. Remember, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing as free noise either. The doorbell rang sharp and urgent. The decibel meter jumped to 70. And Dad's brow creased, his expression darkening. Some people have no manners at all. Mom hurried to the door, and the moment it opened, my Aunt Lisa burst in. She was carrying a large cake box and an enormous Lego set under one arm, her voice filling the entire room before she had even stepped inside. Jenny, happy birthday. The decibel meter went wild. 75, 80, 85. Dad's expression hardened. Entry fee $50. Noise fee $300. Cash or check. Aunt Lisa stopped dead in her tracks. He looked at the decibel meter on the wall, then at me curled up in my chair. Gary, are you out of your mind? Today is Jenny's 5th birthday, and you're charging me a noise fee? Dad rose from his seat and positioned himself in front of her. This is my home. In my house. You follow my rules. And this cake and these toys. Did I approve of them? There's no room in this house for this kind of clutter. Aunt Lisa's hands were shaking with anger. She set the cake down on the table with a loud thud, and the decibel meter maxed out. I'm not taking it back. Jenny, come here. Let me cut you a piece of cake. She reached for my hand, and her fingers were warm, but I did not move. I looked to Dad instead. Jenny, he said, your choice. Eat the cake and your debt doubles this week. Refuse, and I'll take $10 off what you owe. I pulled my hand back. If my debt doubled, I would owe nearly $500 next week. There would be no broth, only water. I don't want any, I whispered, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Lisa stared at me as though she could not believe what she was hearing. Jenny, what are you afraid of? I'm right here. He can't do anything to you while I'm here. I shook my head. She did not understand. Once she left, Dad would settle every account. And the interest would pile up in ways I could never repay. You see? Dad settled back into his chair, the corner of his mouth curling. See? She's smarter than you are. She knows how things work. Aunt Lisa drew a slow breath, then crouched down in front of me until we were eye to eye, her voice going soft. Jenny, tell me honestly, do you want the cake? Forget the money. Forget your dad. Just tell me, do you want it? I stared at the cake. There was a little rabbit piped in frosting on top, and the cream looked impossibly sweet. I wanted it more than anything. More than I had wanted anything in a long time. I glanced at the number on the wall. I don't want any. I lied. Aunt Lisa's eyes went red. She shot to her feet and pointed a finger straight at Dad's face. Gary, this is abuse. What do you think she is to you? Dad dabbed his mouth with his napkin unhurried. I'm teaching her how the real world works. Your kind of coddling is what ruins children. He set the napkin down. Now, please leave. You've been over the limit for far too long. I'll send you the bill. Aunt Lisa was shaking so hard that I thought she might grab something off the table and throw it at someone. Then she looked at me, at the fear on my face, and she stopped herself. Fine, Gary. Have it your way. However, what goes around comes around. The door closed behind her, and the house fell back into silence. 28 decibels. Dad nodded, satisfied. The noodles had gone cold and soggy by then, but I ate every last bite without making a sound. I had traded a piece of birthday cake for this bowl. And in this house, that made it the most valuable thing on the table. That night, I lay in my small bed, clutching a coin in my fist. Aunt Lisa had pressed it into my pocket on her way out, without saying a word, but later I found a note with it. It read, Jenny, keep this in case you ever need to buy yourself a way out. I did not know what buying a way out meant, but I knew that this $1 was the only money I had that was truly mine, and the only thing in this world of price tags that I could call my own. I woke up in the middle of the night, burning up. My throat felt like I had swallowed coals, and my head was so heavy I could barely lift it off the pillow. I pressed a hand to my forehead. It was scorching hot. What I felt first was not pain. It was fear. Being sick meant spending money for doctor's visits, prescriptions, and lab fees. Dad had said before that getting sick was the result of poor self-management, a personal failing, and that all costs would be the responsibility of the one who got sick. I pulled the blanket tighter and lay there shaking. I needed water, but getting to the kitchen meant passing Dad's bedroom. And every step of that journey would betray me. Footsteps on the floor, a creaking door, or even the tap running. If I woke him up, the fines would be enormous. So I stayed where I was. My throat was so dry it burned with every breath I took. I tilted my head back and opened my mouth, trying to pull in some cool air, but even that felt hot. Going down, Mom. I mouthed into the dark, tears sliding silently into my ears. I did not make a sound. If no one found out, it did not count as being sick. If I did not take any medicine, I would not have to spend any money. I held on to that logic as I drifted back to sleep, to a string of feverish nightmares. The decibel meter grew teeth and came after me. Bills fell like snow and buried me alive. When I woke again, it was morning and Dad was shaking my shoulder. Do you know what time it is? Get up. I tried to push myself upright and could not. Everything went dark, and I fell back against the pillow with a dull thud. I looked at the decibel meter out of habit. It was still under the limit. Dad frowned and pressed his hand to my forehead, then pulled it back. You're burning up. He checked his watch, then pulled out his phone and opened the calculator. Round-trip cab fare $60. Office visit fee $50. The blood work $80. Medication, roughly $200. Half a day off work for me, $500 in lost wages. Total $890. He held the screen up in front of my face. Your account is already in the negative. So how exactly are we paying for this? I could barely see the numbers through the fever haze. Dad, I feel really sick. I managed. Feeling sick is not an excuse to avoid settling your debts, he said evenly. Sign the paperwork and I'll take you right now. The interest is 3 times the standard bank rate. You can repay it with interest once you're old enough to work. He pulled a sheet of paper from his briefcase. It was densely lined with printed clauses, clearly prepared well in advance. He held out a pen. My hands were trembling so badly, I could not hold it. The pen slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. Dad picked it up and placed it back in my hand. Then Mom came running in. She must have heard the noise, because she took one look at my face and screamed, Jenny. The decibel meter flashed red. Dad turned and looked at her. What are you screaming for? That's a $50 fine. Mom ignored him. She crossed the room and pulled me into her arms. and I felt her tears land on my cheek, all and cool against my burning skin. Gary, have you lost your mind? She's burning up and you're making her sign paperwork? Take her to the hospital right now. It was the loudest I had ever heard Mom speak. Dad's expression did not change. Are you paying for it? Your paycheck goes through me. Every dollar you earn has already been allocated. This wasn't in the budget, and someone has to cover it. Either she signs or you sign. The moment one of you does, we leave. Mom held me against her chest, her whole body trembling. She looked down at me, barely conscious, in her arms, then back at Dad, who stood there, waiting with all the patience of someone reviewing a contract. All sign, she said. In the car, I leaned against Mom while Dad drove in silence, the financial news radio program murmuring from the front speakers. When the market was up, the corner of his mouth lifted. When it dipped, his brow tightened. The daughter burning up on the back seat did not factor into his calculations. As long as I did not die, the investment could still be recovered. At the hospital, I did not cry. When they put the 4 in, the nurse smiled and told me I was incredibly brave for not making a peep. She did not know that I was not brave. I just could not afford to cry. If I had made a sound when the needle went in, it would have cost another $100. And that was several days of Mom's grocery money. I watched the 4 drip and thought about how each drop was money, flowing directly into my veins. I was becoming more and more expensive with every passing minute. And the more expensive I became, the less I felt I deserved to exist. Dad, it was right. I was a liability. If I had not gotten sick, those $890 could have gone into something that actually grew in value. It was my fault. By the time we got home, it was evening, and the fever had come down a little, though my head still swam. Dad took the hospital bill and pinned it to the front of the refrigerator, in the most visible spot he could find. Sandra, remember that this gets paid back. We'll take it out of next month's household budget. I lay on the couch and stared at the decibel meter on the wall. 25 house was as quiet as a graveyard, broken only by the sound of Dad typing at his desk, logging every expense with careful precision. That included the $5 parking fee at the hospital, which had already been added to my tab. I reached into my pocket. The coin was still there. The one Aunt Lisa had slipped me. The one that existed nowhere in Dad's ledger. It was my only secret and my only hope. I let myself wonder, just for a moment, whether one day I could save up enough coins to buy my way out. I wanted to buy my freedom, the right to cry as loud as I wanted, and laugh without watching a number on the wall. However, right now, I was just a 5-year-old girl with a burning throat, a mounting debt, and a single silver coin hidden beneath my mattress. The $890 hospital bill became the invisible noose around my neck. Dad didn't just pin it to the refrigerator, he made it the centerpiece of our existence. He drew a grid on a whiteboard next to the kitchen table, tracking my repayment plan. Since I was too young to work, he calculated my debt in household labor, assigning arbitrary, microscopic values to my silent chores. Dusting the baseboards without letting the rag squeak, 10 cents. Organizing his shoe closet without letting a single heel click against the wood, 25 cents. Weeding the backyard garden, pulling the roots slowly so the snapping stems wouldn't register on the outdoor decibel app he had installed on his phone, 50 cents. At that rate, factoring in the daily breathing and lodging fees he continuously tacked onto the principal, it would take me a decade just to reach zero. I became a ghost. I learned to walk by rolling my weight from the outer edge of my heel to the ball of my foot, absorbing the impact in my knees. I learned to swallow my sneezes until my eyes watered and my sinuses ached. I learned to chew my food until it was a tasteless paste, swallowing only when my throat was sufficiently lubricated to avoid any audible gulp. Mom shrank right alongside me. To help pay down my medical debt, she took a weekend shift at a local bakery. However, because she used Dad's car to drive there, he charged her a vehicle depreciation and mileage fee that ate up 60% of her earnings. The rest went straight into his bank account to cover my hospital visit. She stopped smiling. She stopped humming while she cooked. The beautiful, measured rhythm of her chopping vegetables slowed down until it was painfully deliberate, each slice of a knife a silent plea for mercy from the little black device on the wall. By the time I turned 7, the decibel meter had become a deity in our home. Its glowing red numbers were the eyes of an ever-watchful, unforgiving God. We worshipped it with absolute silence. Dad, however, grew bolder. The quieter we became, the more he seemed to resent us for beating his system. He started adjusting the baseline. What used to be a 40 decibel limit for speaking was dropped to 35, then 30. He installed a water meter on the Shoriad, charging by the ounce. He replaced the light switches with time dials, deducting from Mom's grocery budget if a room remained illuminated for more than 3 minutes. Efficiency, he would say, sitting at the head of the dining table in the suffocating quiet, cutting a steak with surgical precision. The world is entirely transactional, Sandra. I am simply preparing her for reality. When she leaves this house, she will be the most disciplined, cost-effective human being on the planet. I didn't want to be cost-effective. I just wanted to be a child. Every night, under the cover of darkness, I would reach beneath my mattress and trace the embossed ridges of the $1 coin Aunt Lisa had given me. Keep this in case you ever need to buy yourself a way out. For 2 years, I had tried to figure out what that meant. Where was the door that cost exactly $1? Who would sell me a ticket away from this white-walled purgatory? I didn't know it yet, but the answer was coming. It was riding on the back of a torrential, roaring storm. It happened on a Tuesday in late October. The weather had been brooding all afternoon, the sky bruised purple and heavy with the threat of a deluge. By nightfall, the storm broke. It wasn't just rain, it was a violent, screaming tempest. Thunder rattled the foundation of the house, and the wind howled like a wounded animal against the glass. For the first time in my life, the house was filled with noise. Dad was frantic. The thunder was registering at 85 decibels, causing the meter on the wall to flash an angry, strobing red. He paced the living room, furiously tapping on his tablet, frustrated that he couldn't find the sky for its disruption. Eventually, he went into the master bedroom, shut the heavy oak door, and put on his expensive, noise-canceling headphones. He locked himself away in his curated, silent bubble, leaving Mom and me to weather the storm. Mom was exhausted from working a double shift and had fallen into a deep, medicated sleep in the guest room, a privilege Dad charged her $15 a night for, but she had been too tired to care. I couldn't sleep. The roaring wind outside was both terrifying and intoxicating. I took my $1 coin from under the mattress and sat on the floor of my bedroom, just listening. I rolled the coin across the carpet. It didn't make a sound, but I imagined it clinking like a jackpot. Then, during a brief lull in the thunder, I heard it crack. SHHHK. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of shattering glass, coming from the back of the house. The kitchen door. My heart seized. I scrambled to my feet, my ghost-like training taking over instantly. Without making a single sound, I slipped out of my room and crept down the hallway. I peeked around the corner into the living room. A shadow detached itself from the kitchen entrance. It was a man, soaking wet, mud caked on his heavy boots. Water dripped from his dark raincoat, pooling on Dad's pristine hardwood floors. In his right hand, illuminated by the flashes of lightning outside, was a jagged hunting knife. He stood perfectly still for a moment, listening. The house was dead quiet. The decibel meter on the wall glowed a steady, bloody red. 22. The thief took a step forward. 38. He took another. 45. He wasn't here for the TV. He wasn't looking at the silver on the dining table. He was looking at the hallway. He was creeping toward the guest room. Toward my mother. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through my veins. I backed away, slipping silently into the master hallway, and ducked into the open doorway of the large coat wardrobe just outside the guest room. I pulled the heavy winter coats around me, leaving a narrow gap between the hinges to see. This was the moment, the nightmare that had been looming over me. I watched the thief's shadow stretch across the wall as he moved closer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shriek, to raise the alarm, to wake my father in the master bedroom just a few feet away so he could do something, anything. But my eyes drifted to the decibel meter mounted on the hallway wall. The numbers were red and absolute. 45. My hand found nothing but my pajama pocket. Inside was the single $1 coin. I did not have enough allowance. The conditioning of my entire life paralyzed my vocal cords. Speaking above 40 decibels meant $10. Crying or throwing a tantrum was $100 per second. A scream, a true, blood-curdling scream for help, would easily hit 110 decibels. It would cost hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars. It would trigger the disruption fee, the panic fee, the emergency penalty. I simply could not afford it. If I screamed, my debt would skyrocket. I would be eating cold broth for the next 5 years. Dad would tally the cost of the noise before he even looked at the man with a knife. He would blame me for inviting the chaos into our home. The thief was now directly outside Mom's door. He raised his left hand to the brass doorknob. I sat there, trembling, suffocating on the air that my father had bought and paid for. Air is a resource. If you use it, you pay for it. My fingers tightened around the $1 coin. The metal was warm against my skin. Keep this in case you ever need to buy yourself a way out. Aunt Lisa's face flashed in my mind. The fury in her eyes when she had pointed at Dad. This is abuse. What do you think she is to you? Suddenly, looking at the glowing red numbers on the wall, the illusion snapped. The matrix of my father's ledgers, the suffocating rules, the invisible chains of debt. It was all a lie. The meter couldn't hurt me. The numbers were just light bulbs. My father's authority only existed because we had surrendered our voices to it. A way out didn't cost $1. A way out cost a scream. I didn't just open my mouth. I reached down into the deepest, darkest pit of my suppressed, silent little life. I gathered up every swallowed tear, every stifled laugh, every breath I had been too terrified to take. I filled my lungs with Gary's expensive, paid-for air, stealing as much of it as my small chest could hold. And I screamed. It wasn't a child's cry. It was a feral, ear-shattering, window-rattling shriek of pure, unadulterated rebellion. Through the gap in the wardrobe, I watched the decibel meter. 80, 100, 115, 120. The red numbers flashed so fast they blurred, the device emitting an awful, high-pitched error beep as the sensors overloaded. The thief jumped nearly out of his skin. The scream echoed off the white walls, amplifying in the sterile, empty space of the hallway. He dropped his knife in sheer terror. It clattered against the hardwood floor with a loud, metallic clang. He spun around, disoriented, looking for the source of the demonic noise. Before he could take a step toward the wardrobe, the door to the master bedroom flew open. Dad burst into the hallway. He wasn't wearing his glasses, and he was completely blinded by a rage I had never seen before. He wasn't holding a weapon to defend his family. He was holding his phone, the black accounting app glowing brightly in his hand. Who did that? Dad roared, his voice thunderous. Who is making that noise? That is a $500 fine. Jenny, I swear to God. Dad was so consumed by the flashing red light on his app that he didn't even process the masked man standing in the hallway until he was practically chest to chest with him. The thief, panicked and cornered, lunged. Dad looked up just in time to see the man tackle him. The two of them crashed into the hallway console table. A heavy ceramic vase, valued at $250 on Dad's inventory spreadsheet, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The noise was glorious. It was a cacophony of destruction. Get off me, Dad bellowed, wrestling blindly. The thief scrambled frantically, desperately trying to get away. He punched Dad square in the jaw, grabbed his hunting knife from the floor, and in a wild, sweeping motion, slashed out. The blade caught Dad across the shoulder and upper arm. Dad let out a sharp, breathless cry, falling backward against the wall. The thief didn't hesitate. He scrambled down the hallway, sprinted through the living room, and dove back out the shattered kitchen window into the roaring storm, swallowed by the night. The house fell quiet again, save for the rumbling thunder outside and the heavy, ragged sound of my father breathing. I pushed the wardrobe door open and stepped out. Mom's door swung open at the same time. She stood there in her nightgown, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, disoriented by the chaos. She looked at the shattered vase, the muddy footprints, and then at Dad. Dad was sitting on the floor, clutching his right shoulder. Blood, dark and thick, was seeping through his fingers, dripping steadily onto the immaculate, white oak floorboards. Drip, drip, drip. He looked up at Mom, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. Sandra. He gasped, his voice trembling. A man, he had a knife. He cut me. Sandra, call 911. Call an ambulance. Mom stood perfectly still. She looked at the blood staining the floor. She looked at the broken vase. Then she looked at me, standing in the hallway, my chest still heaving from the scream. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was completely, terrifyingly calm. Mom's gaze shifted to the wall. The decibel meter, recovering from my scream, was settling back down. 42. Mom walked slowly toward Dad. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't drop to her knees to check his wound. She just stood over him, looking down at the man who had quantified our misery for years. An ambulance, Mom repeated, her voice deadpan, registering softly on the meter. Yes, now. Dad yelled, wincing in pain. Mom tilted her head. Gary, an ambulance is a $1,500 base fee, plus mileage. The emergency room out-of-network surcharge will easily be another $3,000. Dad stared at her, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? I'm bleeding. Call the police. You're making noise, Gary, Mom said softly. Yelling at your wife. That's a $50 fine. Are you insane? Dad shrieked, his face contorting in agony and disbelief. He stabbed me. Sandra, I am bleeding on the floor. I see that, Mom said, her tone as measured and clinical as Dad's had been the day I broke my arm. And you are bleeding on the custom white oak. That's severe property damage. The biohazard cleaning fee alone will be at least $500, plus the disruption fee for waking me up. You're racking up quite a tab tonight, Gary. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Mom as if he were seeing a stranger. He realized, with a creeping, icy horror, that she was using his own ledger against him. My account, Dad stammered, clutching his bleeding arm tighter. I have money. I'll pay for it. Your money? Mom asked, stepping closer. But Gary, as the head of the household, you established that all liquid assets belong to the estate's primary operational fund. And since you are currently incapacitated, you are a liability to the estate. Sandra, please, he begged, his arrogance finally cracking. The sight of his own blood was stripping away the delusion of his absolute control. I need a doctor. Mom reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out her phone. But she didn't dial 911. Instead, she opened her email. For the past year, Mom said quietly, Lisa and I have been talking to a lawyer. We drew up a post-nuptial asset transfer and full custody agreement. I've emailed it to you 3 times, but you always deleted it. I just sent it again. She nudged Dad's phone, which had fallen to the floor during the scuffle, toward his good hand with her foot. Open the app, Gary. Sign the document with your digital signature. Transfer the house, the accounts, and Jenny's custody to me. Completely. You're extorting me, Dad gasped, spitting blood onto the floor. This is illegal. You let me bleed to death. You'll go to prison. I'm not letting you do anything, Mom said smoothly. I am simply offering a service. A life-saving service. And as you've taught us so well, Gary, there is no such thing as a free lunch. If you use a resource, you pay for it. My phone, my time, my mercy. They all have a price. Your balance is insufficient. Sign the paper, or I'm going back to bed. Dad looked from Mom to me. He sought pity in my eyes, hoping to find the obedient, silent little investment he had cultivated. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my $1 coin and tossed it onto the floor. It landed with a sharp clink right next to his pool of blood. Keep the change, I whispered. Dad's breath hitched. He realized he was utterly defeated. His entire empire of control had collapsed under the weight of its own rules. With a trembling, bloody finger, he picked up his phone, opened his email, and clicked the digital signature box on Mom's document. He hit submit. Mom looked at her phone. A notification popped up. Document signed. She nodded, satisfied. Then she dialed 911, her voice returning to normal, feigning the perfect, panicked tone of a distressed wife. Hello? Yes, emergency. My home was broken into. My husband has been stabbed. Please hurry. She hung up the phone and looked at me. The fear that had clouded her eyes for years was gone, replaced by a fierce, radiant fire. Go pack your backpack, Jenny, Mom said. Just the things you love. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran to my room, not caring how loudly my feet stomped on the floorboards. I grabbed my favorite books, my drawing pads, and the few clothes I actually liked. I zipped up my bag with a loud, aggressive rip of the zipper. Every sound I made felt like a heavy chain snapping. By the time the sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm, Mom and I were standing by the front door in our raincoats. The paramedics rushed in, stepping over the shattered vase. They loaded Gary onto a stretcher. He was pale, in shock, but he would live. As they wheeled him out the front door, he weakly turned his head to look at us. You're leaving? He rasped. Mom smiled down at him. We can't afford the air in here anymore, Gary. It's too expensive. We stepped out of the house just as Aunt Lisa's beaten-up SUV pulled into the driveway, her headlights cutting through the pouring rain. She threw the car into park and leaped out, running toward us through the deluge. She didn't ask questions. She took one look at Mom's face, saw the duffel bags in our hands, and wrapped us both in a massive, crushing hug. You did it, Lisa laughed, crying into the rain. You actually did it. We climbed into her car. The engine was loud and rickety, the heater blasted noisily, and the radio was playing a rock song with heavy, thumping bass. It was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. As we drove away, I looked back at the White House. The front door was wide open, the rain blowing inside, washing away the ledgers, short-circuiting the decibel meters, flooding the pristine floors. The sanctuary of silence was dead. Epilogue. 20 years later, the world is a wonderfully noisy place. I am 27 years old, standing on a stage in a packed, dimly lit venue in downtown Chicago. The air smells of spilled beer, sweat, and electricity. The crowd is a sea of bodies, moving and shifting. I step up to the microphone. I adjust the strap of my electric guitar over my shoulder. Behind me, my drummer counts us in with 4 sharp clicks of his drumsticks. 1, 2, 3, 4. We slam into the opening chord. The amplifiers roar. The sound waves hit my chest like a physical force, vibrating through my ribs, shaking the floorboards beneath my boots. It is loud. It is deafening. It is gloriously, unapologetically chaotic. I look out into the audience. Near the back, standing by the sound booth, are 2 women. One is Aunt Lisa, holding a plastic cup of beer, nodding her head to the heavy bass. Beside her is my mother. Her hair has grayed, but her posture is straight, and the lines of worry have long since melted from her face. She smiles, puts her fingers in her mouth, and lets out a piercing, joyous whistle that easily cuts through the wall of sound. I smile back, step up to the mic, and I sing. I sing until my throat is raw. I sing until the walls shake. I sing because I know the true value of sound. Noise isn't the mark of lesser people. It is the proof of life. It is the chaotic, messy, beautiful evidence that we are here, that we are breathing, and that we cannot be silenced. After the show, as I am packing my gear into its hard case, I hear the familiar clinking of metal. I reach into the small pocket of my worn-out leather jacket and pull out a faded, tarnished silver coin. A $1 coin. I hold it in my palm, feeling the weight of it. My father was right about one thing and one thing only. There is no such thing as free noise. It cost me my childhood. It cost my mother her youth. But looking out at the messy, loud, vibrant life I've built, I flip the coin into the air, catch it, and laugh out loud. A booming, resonant, 100 decibel laugh. It was worth every single penny.